Welcome, everyone, and thank you for making time amidst everyone's busy schedules and the holiday period fast approaching. My name is Kevin Elliott, and I'm a senior manager in the trade policy and negotiations branch with the government of British Columbia. We are very fortunate to take advantage of the opportunity that's come together to collaborate with our European Union colleagues in developing a series of events aimed at promoting the opportunities for trade and investment diversification through Ceta. We together held a technical briefing with a Ceta trade expert just a few short weeks ago in Vancouver with a comparable aim, and are now embarking on a set of webinars oriented around particular sectors of interest, beginning with the one today on energy and the opportunities that are made available through Ceta to scale and trade. We are hoping that the excellent roster that we are very grateful to have on hand today will leave you with some lasting impressions in terms of some of the latest developments in the respective energy sectors of BC and the European Union, how to better facilitate services between both jurisdictions, procurement opportunities that exist on both sides of the Atlantic, and a discussion opportunity to follow up and explore any existing and future needs. We do have a very full program, so I will keep my comments short. We will begin with some opening comments from both the province of British Columbia and our European Union colleagues in Ottawa. We will then segue into a healthy overview of the BC energy sector ecosystem with a focus on opportunities in procurement and investment. And we'll then flip the script and hear from those same elements, but from the perspective of the European Union, joined equally by our esteemed and experienced colleagues with experience there. I will mention over the course of the session, we certainly are hoping for a level of interactiveness. So please do pose your questions and your comments either in the chat or at the end of each session. There will be an opportunity to raise them. In the meantime, we certainly will ask that you ensure that your mics are off and turned off for the duration of the event, unless, of course, posing a question. The same thing goes for your cameras. And finally, we'll mention that today's session, for folks who haven't noticed, is being recorded. So we certainly do prefer that your questions are directly attributed to yourselves. But if you would rather that they not be incorporated into the recording, please do let us know within 48 hours, and we can ensure that they do get removed from the final recording. So without any further delay, I would like to now turn it over to our government representatives, who themselves are no strangers to the energy discussion. We have Ruben Kubiak, who is the European Union's Trade Counselor to Canada. Prior to joining the delegation of the EU to Canada in September of this year, he spent several years working on trade relations with North America in the European Commission's Directorate General for Trade and Economic Security, gaining a deep understanding of transatlantic trade opportunities and challenges. He's trained as a scientist. He began his career in the Directorate General for Energy, so where he focused on international energy cooperation. We will then move over to Mark Irwin, Executive Director for Energy Resources at the Government of British Columbia, to help contextualize our discussion today. Mark is the Executive Director of Energy Economics and Royalties for our province, with over 25 years of experience in energy policy and market analysis. He leads initiatives on global energy trends, financial modeling, and royalty frameworks. He's represented BC at major international energy conferences and played key roles in trade missions around the world, building partnerships with global energy companies and governments. I will begin with you, Mr. Kubiak. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar co-hosted by the delegation of the European Union to Canada and the Government of British Columbia. And as Kevin, allow me to offer you a brief introduction from my side. This is our first joint webinar on the opportunities that arise from economically connecting British Columbia and the EU. We decided to focus it on the energy sector for two reasons. First, the global push for low carbon energy requires innovative technologies and large investments in the EU and in British Columbia. Second, Canada and the EU both face challenging trading partners. I don't want to name them right now, but we see trade and economic actions increasingly complicating the doing business with international partners. This forces us to de-risk dependencies and look to trusted and reliable partners like the EU and British Columbia. And indeed, European and Canadian companies are ideally positioned to benefit from this because, first and foremost, of our comprehensive economic and trade agreement, more in short, we call it Ceta. Now, Ceta is a very ambitious trade deal, covers almost all aspects of our bilateral trade and investment. For example, Ceta has eliminated 99% of tariffs on goods traded between us. It has really opened up the Canadian and European services market. Ceta also provides for mutual access to government contracts, so public procurement. It lays the foundation for regulatory cooperation and alignment through various forums. It is really a living agreement that tries to stay relevant. And with that, it has increased, or it has helped to increase trade by 72%. Now, what does that mean in practice for you here as companies? Well, Ceta offers you open markets. It offers you low barriers between British Columbia and the European Union. It offers you stability and it offers you predictability. I also want to touch about something else because we often hear in our discussion with companies that there are misunderstandings when it comes to CETAs, and I wanted to tackle one of them. One is the belief that companies cannot rely on CETA in member states that are still in the ratification process. Now, allow me to debunk this myth here. CETA has been approved by the EU and Canada, and almost all provisions are fully applied throughout the whole of Canada and the EU. So it does not matter if you do business with another company that is located in Germany, my home state, which has ratified CETA, or with a business from France, which is still in the ratification process. The same is true for European businesses based in one of our member states. CETA applies to you. This is a very important misconception that I want to debunk here. Now, second misunderstanding comes often from how CETA integrates with the EU single market. CETA provides Canadian company with access to one single integrated EU market. It allows British Columbian companies to enter one market with one set of rules that are uniformly applied. And allow me to be frank here, in many respects, the EU market is more integrated than the Canadian market. This means for exporters from British Columbia that once you export to any of our member states and the product is legally placed on our market, you can move it freely within the EU. The rules to enter the EU market are the same applied everywhere. So CETA is therefore really an enabler and provides these opportunities. It is a tool that allows our companies from British Columbia and the European Union to help in the necessary development of our low carbon energy system. So that's the focus of the first seminar. Allow me, however, to end my introduction with a word of caution. Today's webinar is about the opportunities CETA provides and CETA created. But these opportunities are increasingly challenged by what I would call economic nationalism. We see my country first. We see binationalistic. That will inevitably mean reduced trade opportunities. So especially for businesses, for you here, to be vocal about the need to only protect what needs to be protected and safeguard the open trade and investment that CETA created between trusted partners like the EU and Canada. We will continue doing our part and promote the benefits of CETA. And as Kevin has said in the beginning, and I also said, this is really just the first webinar of a planned series between British Columbia and the EU. We want to build up on this event today. We want to offer more information on CETA opportunities in other sectors, so I can only encourage you to please stay tuned for upcoming events in the next year. And with that, that's really it. Thank you very much, and I hope you really enjoy this webinar and can take a lot out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, over to you from the perspective of Government of BC.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. I've got a few slides I was going to be sharing with everyone today just to provide a bit of context to the energy landscape here in BC before we pass the microphone over to our colleagues. But in means of introduction, as Kevin mentioned, my name is Mark Irwin. I am the Executive Director for Energy Economics and Royalties within the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions. So our ministry is responsible for providing not only the supply of energy, but overseeing the production and distribution of energy across the province of British Columbia. We also work very closely with a number of our export partners. So we'll talk a little bit about our energy exports that are happening here in the province. And, certainly goes without saying, we have a focus on climate solutions and our province's climate policy. So, Kevin, just as a quick check, you can see the intro slide for me.
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So, won't take too long, but I wanted to provide the audience with a brief landscape. My background is in markets and economics, so you'll probably see me talk a little bit about that. But when we look at British Columbia and the energy use in British Columbia today, energy, like everywhere else in the world, is the foundational component to our economy. It powers our transportation system, our industry, as well as our homes. And like many places in the world, it's a mix of fuels that we see. So from refined petroleum products like your diesel and your gasolines to natural gas, all down to electricity. And these are really our primary energy sources and how they're used in the province. As you can see, over 60% of our current energy suite in the province comes from fossil fuels. And this is something that our Clean BC program certainly has been looking to adjust and make changes over time. And with that, we also know that the portion of our electricity, which still serves as a small portion right now of our primary energy source, but the majority of that, 98% of that, comes from clean electricity, renewable sources, right? So this provides us with a little bit of a landscape of what the world looks like within British Columbia today. But British Columbia produces more energy than it consumes in a given year. And you can see that by the opening sort of scale on the left-hand side there. Nearly 2.5 times the amount of energy is produced in the province every year than it is consumed. And when you look at the various fuel sources, the two I wanted to highlight quickly were natural gas and those petroleum products. So we produce a large quantity of natural gas in the province, much more than we consume domestically on an annual basis. And that's because the province of British Columbia has been a supplier of natural gas around the world, or predominantly throughout North America, I would say, over the last number of decades. So we serve markets across Canada and down into the United States as well. We'll talk about it in our next slide, but as you'll see, the exports of natural gas to other markets around the world through liquefied natural gas are growing in our province as well. So we're expecting this balance on our natural gas side to tip even further onto the production side. A bit of a counterbalance for us is when the hydrocarbons that are produced in the province of British Columbia are really focused on natural gas. We have a very small oil sector, and with that, an even smaller refining sector. So we actually need to import the vast majority of what we use to power our cars and vehicles on a regular basis. The other two fuels you saw in the opening slide there, biofuels and electricity, really though we consume what we produce in a given year. So those two really remain closely in balance right now. So it's really those first two, or really that natural gas that is making BC more of an energy producer. If I look at our current natural gas landscape, for those who aren't familiar, the primary natural gas basin that's in British Columbia actually straddles the border of British Columbia and the province of Alberta. And this is probably one of the largest, most prolific natural gas reserves in most of the world, certainly in North America. It's comparable in size to some of the larger basins that you see in the United States. And this is what has been attracting a lot of recent development here in the province. And much of that recent development has been focused on export. So this map of British Columbia that you see here, really you can see that Montney Basin up on the top right of the map, but it highlights the various export projects that are either under construction or have been proposed here in the province, as well as some of the supporting pipelines. Most of these projects, all of these projects certainly, are located along the coastline. They're intended to serve global markets, but the key point I wanted to make about some of these export projects is where many of them are looking to power their facility through the use of electricity. And that means we're going to see a lower carbon emission or carbon intensity associated with that production, not only at the LNG facility, but actually throughout the value chain of natural gas production here in British Columbia. Many of our producers in the upstream portion who are extracting natural gas actually power up much of their facilities through electricity as well. So the entire value chain brings a natural gas molecule to market that has one of the lowest carbon intensities around the world. I have a lot more details and happy during the Q&A session to jump into the different facilities if people are interested, but certainly an interesting landscape for us. I wanted to sort of finish off by highlighting some of the electricity projects that are in flight here. And we have a growing electricity sector here in British Columbia. Last year in 2024, we had a call for power, one of our first calls for power that we've seen in many years. And through that, we saw 9 wind and 1 solar project come forward. We are expecting future call for power projects from our electricity suppliers here in the province, and the 2 primary ones are BC Hydro and FortisBC. We also have stepped up a specific clean energy and major projects office here in the province that look to prioritize many of these projects and help provide supports for investors who are looking to connect with these projects or interested in advancing some of these major projects in the province. And you can see some of the prioritization criteria that we've identified here. We're also recognizing that to support the further electrification of our province will require some new large-scale infrastructure. So recently, the province has been looking to advance, in partnership with BC Hydro and First Nations, the North Coast Transmission Line. And this will be a new large electricity transmission line that will power specifically the northwest of the province, where we're seeing a lot of developments happen throughout natural gas. We saw some of those LNG export facilities, as well as critical minerals. So it's important for us here in the province to find a balance between economic development and emissions reductions, and we're doing so through the use of electricity. Very excited for the rest of our discussion here today. Kevin, I'll pass the microphone back over to you.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you both. And I think a perfect segue, for our first segment. We'd like to focus and build off what you were just mentioning there, Mark, about the fundamentals and investment and services mobility and the procurement landscape here in BC Energy. So to do that, we are joined by Jay Mather and Robert Glasgow to walk us through it. I'll just introduce them briefly before turning it over. Jay is the CEO of Carbon Free Group and the Chief Innovation Officer for the LCBA EU Canada Phase 2 Clean Tech Bridge at Climate Door. With more than 25 years of experience advancing innovation, clean tech, and environmental policy across Europe, the UK, and Canada, he's played a key role in shaping low carbon strategies for governments and industry. Jay also has supported reconciliation efforts through clean energy partnerships with 15 First Nations in BC and serves on the advisory board of Simon Fraser University's Clean Energy Research Group. Welcome, Jay. And Robert Glasgow is a partner at McCarthy Tetro's International Trade and Investment Law Group, where he advises clients on the full spectrum of Canadian trade, customs, and economic sanctions matters. His practice covers trade remedies, anti-dumping and countervailing duty disputes, export controls, controlled goods compliance, and economic sanctions risk management. He also has significant expertise in government procurement, guiding public institutions on obligations arising under Canada's trade agreements and representing clients in procurement challenges. So quite the expertise we've got to be able to kind of share. So maybe I'll begin by turning it over to you, Jay.
Thank you. Everybody see my screen?
We can.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. We'll dive straight in. So we're going to be talking about the perspective from the outside in, from Europe to BC. There's a lot of different issues to think about. A lot of things have been touched on already in the previous conversations, but we'll go into a little more detail. Sorry, one sec. Okay, so the big picture is BC has a climate target plan through its Clean BC policy. And basically, this is the big climate action plan that is driving a lot of the energy growth that has already been mentioned. There's the targets. There's a whole bunch of carbon reduction targets like there are in many places in the world, all the way up to 80% by 2050. And there are some current updates on the status of how far BC has got and what the challenges are. The image on the right shows that, like many places in North America, especially, that we've not been hitting our carbon reduction targets. In fact, as we can see on the top right-hand corner of that image, BC's emissions have pretty well flatlined since 2000, because they've gone up and down, but they've not really continued to drop, whereas most of the rest of the world has continued to reduce its emissions. This is in combination of multiple factors, but that's also because the fossil fuel projects in BC are advancing rapidly. So we're not having an aggregate reduction. So we're not on track to hit any of our targets. Now, what's interesting here, there's a plus behind this, which is basically that in order to meet those targets, we're going to have to do some new things. We're going to have to do things much more radically or differently or transformationally. And the gap that we exist is about 13 million tons a year in British Columbia. Now, Clean BC has just recently gone through review. It just actually happened last week or two, which is basically a huge process where British Columbia asked two independent reviewers to evaluate the plan itself, the performance itself, and understand the gaps and try to understand and provide advice as to how BC could adjust its actions to come back in compliance with its own goals. And what it basically pointed out was that there needs to be a lot clearer government direction to the BC Utilities Commission and BC Hydro. These are the governing organizations and the big energy producer and distributor in British Columbia, to integrate climate targets into its decision making. So right now, there's not that much integration. There's limitations as to how different pieces of the process manage things and have influence over things. The Utilities Commission is basically an overriding quasi-government organization whose job it is to make sure that the BC taxpayers are getting value for money from our utilities, but it doesn't have the ability to force BC's own energy generation company, which is owned by the province, to comply with the climate targets. So there are some pieces here that still haven't been fully integrated. The other thing is that under the current regulatory framework, BC Hydro is incentivized to be very conservative in terms of demand projections. And so what we've got is a slight mismatch between what the province says it wants, what its goals are, and what its primary energy utility is doing about it. And I'm pointing this out because it's vital to understand as a European how there's a difference between policy, strategy, and action. And that's not unusual. It's common throughout the world. But this Clean BC review has served to point out how broad of a difference there is between those two things. And the government commitment to new calls for power every 2 years sends a signal to wind and solar developers and First Nations that there is a want to participate in this growth, as was mentioned by the previous speaker. But BC Hydro's resource plan still says there's no need for much new power. So we've got this constant mismatch with the electrification agenda happening in British Columbia, both because of government incentives as well as independent. People switching to electric vehicles are happening all over the place in the province, like they are in everywhere in the world, but so too are people putting in heat pumps as replacing gas heating. So too is industrial electrification. Such as the natural gas and LNG sector, which is wanting to electrify for a long time. Its upstream, its distribution, and its processing. The utility has not been matching its plans to those goals. And so there's this disjunct that's been happening. Now, that sounds negative, which it is, but I'm pointing this out because what it actually does is this review has highlighted that if BC wants to meet its goals, it's going to have to do something about it. And we haven't even thought about how data centers and AI are going to affect our electricity demand. The current expectations mean that one large Canadian telecoms company has plans for new data centers in BC that exceed what BC Hydro predicts will be the entire extra demand for data centers by 2030. So just one company has more expectations than just the entire BC Hydro's plans for the whole province. So that mismatch means there are challenges and pitfalls that we got to navigate. So another big one, and I'm sorry to be negative, but I wanted to start this way before we talk about the pluses, because it's essential. There is a certification and regulatory issue between Europe and Canada. We are obligated under the Ceta agreement for Canadian organizational bodies that manage our certification and regulations to recognize European standards, but there's a route map to do so, and that route map sometimes becomes challenging for innovators. My day job is helping EU innovators bring their techs to Canada, and this is often a barrier because in order to get the Canadian certifications, there's a significant, often barrier for price point or time. It can cost a lot of money to get a Canadian certification, and in many ways you have to start over again from scratch because the European standards don't translate. Now, that said, this is something that's been highlighted and understood a lot more now, and people are trying to get into this issue in more detail, so that's a good thing. Canada's now much more interested in trying to recognize and do trade with Europe, so that's another really positive thing. And we have found some ways of navigating through this with Indigenous communities, which I will talk about in a moment. There's a conservative low growth historic perspective from BC Hydro and the BC government, as mentioned, which is at odds with the reality. So what we need is that low growth historic perspective to be adjusted to be in line with reality. That's what the Clean BC review is calling for. So this is an interesting time. We have oversight issues. The BC Utilities Commission is limited in its ability to enforce certain types of change, which is something that has to be addressed. Canada is quite risk averse. This is something Europeans tend to find quite surprising. We're viewed as a very liberal, open-minded country, which we are. At the same time, we're hyper-conservative around risk. So that's a challenge. EU companies and many Canadian companies still need to learn how to work with First Nations. I will go into a little more depth about that in the next slide. There is a slow pace of decision-making, licensing, and permitting, which is starting to be addressed. The BC government has, and the federal government of Canada have recognized the need through a variety of mechanisms to streamline decision-making and licensing and permitting. Probably the most that's ever happened in Canadian history has happened in the last 6 months. So this is something that's being looked at. Where to begin? This is a big question. How do you start? So this is the supporting solutions and next steps. One of the big ones is the EU-funded Low Carbon Business Action Plan. This is the Cleantech Bridge project that supports EU cleantech SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, bring their solutions to Canada. I'm the senior consultant on this project. So what we are funded to do is to help European companies bring their technologies to Canada, provided they're small businesses, which is under 500 staff, so it's still pretty large organizations. There are a lot of incumbents that are already here. This is how you get into the Canadian marketplace, is you start by trying to work with those that are already present, that are already in relationship, that are already procuring and working with and selling products and services to the Canadian marketplace. Bring your art of the possible, because BC needs new ideas, solutions, policies, and methodologies. We are in a position where there's probably never been more hunger in Canada to diversify. And that's why the art of the possible from European specialists and organizations that have been doing this for a lot longer than we have are really vital. I would say on average, Europe is around 15 to 20 years ahead of Canada when it comes to a lot of things in this area. And we have the opportunity here to copy instead and cut and paste instead of reinvent the wheel. And so we need those answers. We need examples. We need pilots. That's what this is so exciting for. Engage with your country's embassy or representatives in BC. Most European nations actually have trade specialists that are located in Canada that are there to help you bring your solutions. And take advantage of that. Engage with them. See if they can help, what the relationships are like. And build relationships with associations. There's a lot of organizations in Canada that are very active in this space that you can jump straight into to give you access to the policy, the strategy, the incumbents, the methodologies, the procurement method, everything. So join these organizations if this is what you're in. If you're a hydrogen company from Estonia and you're interested in hydrogen in Canada, jump on the Canadian Hydrogen Association. If you want to build renewable energy in BC, Jump on the Clean Energy Association of BC. There's so many of these that can help. The Clean BC Review provides a roadmap for BC and how to get on track to meet its target. Now it's up to the BC government to decide on what it wants to take advantage of and take action on with what has been suggested. Now I'm off to Robert here.
All right, so maybe you can just load the whole slide. I don't do the flashy transitions.
Sure. There we go.
So coming on in here, now getting to some of the nuts and bolts of the procurement system, because this is one of the best ways to get into the market. Because one of the big challenges for SMEs entering a foreign market is you don't have a customer base, you don't have a billing base, you don't have a marketing base. And often that can serve as a barrier to entry into getting into the market. One of the nice things about government procurement work is that a lot of that gets solved for you because you have already customer in the form of the Crown, both BC, the other provinces, and Canada federally, who has many projects in BC that need work and also offers procurement opportunities. You have a system that's designed to be fair, and I'll get into that a little bit as we talk about the procurement process. And you have a system that, by and large, you have a lot of a leg up in as a European entity entering into Canada. And I'll get into this a little bit, talking about the specifics of Ceta, because unlike a lot of Canada's other trading partners, like the Americans, the CPTPP members, which now includes is soon going to include the United Kingdom and South Korea, the Ceta reaches deep down into the sub-federal level. BC, Ontario, the other provinces, and their various crown entities and crown corporations have a lot more obligations to you as a EU supplier than other trading partners and under other agreements. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of where you can find this. And I'm going to go deeper into procurement. I believe we have a special session and a webinar on procurement specifically. Just trying to give you the rundown of the entire procurement, all my time, all Jay's time, and probably the time of the people coming after me. So getting down here, the first thing to understand is, as I said, you don't necessarily need the marketing department in Canada because all bids get publicly posted. And in BC, that is through BC Bid. And that's our central bid depository in BC. Bidding opportunities get put up there. You can sort by entity type, like who's doing the offering. What kind of offering is it? Are you interested in supplying goods or services, or goods and services, or construction services? There's also opportunities to sort by closing date, by description of the matter. It can get fairly granular in what you go into. And what's nice is that once you find the opportunity on the high level, BC Bids provides all the bid documentation for you for free that you can pull down and get an understanding of what BC is looking to buy. And that gives you access to the technical specifications of the request, of the timelines and the rules for bidding on requests. And all that is in that centralized system. It also includes simultaneously contract award notices. So you know what gets awarded and to whom it gets awarded after award has happened. And that can help you a little bit on the protecting your rights bit that I'll get into in the next slide. BC Bid is also useful for you as a supplier because there is a supplier guide, and that provides a little bit of a step-by-step tutorial for how to work the nuts and bolts of the system, as I would put it. For example, it walks you through getting your BC EID, which is a registration with the BC government that's then used to participate in the bidding system and to register with BC Bid. It walks you through how to use the portal itself and then how to submit your bids on opportunities. It's a fantastic resource that the BC government provides, and you can reach out through BC Bid to the BC government if you need help with any element of this process. It's also worth noting that the purchasing entities themselves are likely to have their own requirements and their own policies and procedures. For example, because it's relevant to the energy sector, BC Hydro has its own procurement practices document that outlines what its commitments are, how it conducts procurements, and how it scores procurements. And that can definitely help you in understanding how you want to approach the opportunities and what opportunities you want to approach. And I just want to add as one high level, I know I can't get into the nuts and bolts of procurement, but it's important to understand that in the Canadian system, procurement is heavily contract based. A lot of the rules of specific procurements will be contained in the procurement itself. We don't have something equivalent to the US FARs or some of the EU procurement legislation. Now, BC and the other provinces do typically have procurement guidelines. They typically have procurement directives, especially for broader public sector entities. And like I said, entities like BC Hydro have their own procurement practices. But outside of the trade agreements, the legislative framework typically flows down to the contractual one. So it's important to carefully analyze the contracts and the RFPs that you download to make sure that you're complying with all of the rules. Because while some RFPs in the modern age are getting more flexible, typically rules are strictly enforced. So if we go to the next slide, and we walk now through just some high-level elements of Ceta and what it means for you. And the first element here is that you get certain binding rules that protect you and ensure fairness. And that includes rules against non-discrimination and fair specifications and fair evaluation. These are fairly significant, and there is the recourse to the bid protest mechanism if you feel as bidders that your rights are violated. This bid protest mechanism is an incredibly speedy format. It's an ad hoc arbitral body, and it typically issues its rulings within 120 days. And I'm really not an expert in EU litigation, but I've done Ontario and federal litigation and BC litigation, and I can tell you 120 days from cradle to grave is some of the fastest litigation you will see in Canada. And this approach ensures that any procurement disputes get handled quickly, effectively, and in a way that helps prevent the integrity of the process from being called into question. The one caveat here that I have to say, again, this is a high level of Ceta, is you have to ensure that what you're getting is covered. And this is because Ceta doesn't apply to every procurement. And the first and biggest issue is you have to make sure there's by a covered entity, which is most BC Crown entities and Crown corporations. And there's a specific annex in Ceta. There is of a covered good or service, which covers nearly all goods, except in the energy context. Fuel, in particular, is a special category that does not get covered for energy entities. And that it's over the specified threshold, which is set under World Bank SDRs, which is a basket of global currencies, and which I believe right now is for Crown corporations at approximately $800,000 Canadian, and for BC ministries is closer to 355, is my recollection. It's important to make sure that you're over those thresholds. Now, what's nice, going back to BC Bid, is you don't have to think about this as much, because when you go into BC Bid, it will tell you what trade agreements are applicable to any particular agreement. And the two big ones you'll be looking for are Ceta and CFTA, which is Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Because one common thing that you can do, and we'll get to this, I think Jay's going to walk us through it in just a second, is partnering with Indigenous groups and with local entities can help you better prepare your bid. And it also will give you a Canadian presence and a Canadian bidder that then can get you CFTA protection as well. I'll turn it over to you, Jay.
Thanks, Robert. So here's some support and solutions and next steps. First Nations. Now, for many European organizations and individuals, First Nations is a new concept. In Canada, we have over 600 different First Nations, and over 200 of them happen to be in British Columbia. These First Nations are basically the most culturally and linguistically diverse in the country, British Columbia. Now, First Nations sit in a very unique place within the Canadian context, because there is a degree of where they're going to be basically sitting in the future, all future energy developments. They're going to be partners, supporters, shareholders, landowners, and many projects will actually take place on First Nation land. They sit in the center of almost every single energy development project in one way, shape, or form. First Nations have a degree of self-determination and sovereignty, which means that there is a unique opportunity and challenge And what that basically means is individual First Nations can, in certain circumstances, recognize European standards on their own reserved land for projects and technologies, whereas the rest of Canada can't. Which that basically means that there is opportunities within certain contexts to pilot things on First Nations land that would be much more challenging and more complicated elsewhere in Canada. This is a unique opportunity and gem that Canada presents that no other nation on the planet does. Now, saying that, it's not the simplest thing because there's a lot of relationships that need to be built, a lot of understandings, there's a lot of uniqueness to each given circumstance that needs to be navigated. But what we found within our LCBA project is we've been able to leapfrog over some of the challenges that I highlighted in the previous slides because of the sovereignty. And that is really quite exciting. And the only regions in Europe that have First Nations or Indigenous people basically is Finland and Sweden. They're the only two nations that actually have had to look at these issues from Indigenous cultural basis before. And so what's really fascinating is that most Europeans, this is a brand new concept. Trying to figure out how to do anything or navigate this is complicated, but remember, there's an opportunity. Their land offers this unique opportunity. And they can serve to create innovation spaces within BC that is even Europeans don't have in your own home countries. Grid connections can also fall within BC Hydro's call for power. So if it's about a generating renewable energy and exporting to the grid, it could be via BC Hydro, or it could be behind the fence, renewable energy developments that can help navigate some of the challenges on the First Nation land themselves or with their neighbors. There are projects in British Columbia that we've been involved with where First Nations have been looking to develop big wind projects and then private wire that to a mine that's right next door and not even touch the grid. So this is where things get quite interesting.
Yeah, and we've had similar issues under Ceta because Ceta provides for set-asides under certain situations. And one of the key situations that set-asides can happen is a promotion of Indigenous enterprises, and that can serve as an access way or preferential access for Indigenous groups and Indigenous-owned firms. This also led, at least for a while, into a cottage industry of kind of Indigenous and name-only enterprises where entities would essentially lease out their name to slap on top of a project. And that's something that really has been frowned upon by purchasers and by Indigenous groups and largely by the business community increasingly. Because there's been seen as if you kind of do that, you're not really getting the goodwill in the community and you're not really engaging properly with Indigenous peoples, which end up because, as Jay said, so many of these projects are smack dab in the middle of Indigenous territories and lands. That just ends up causing problems for the project. I think governments in industry have both figured this out. But there's a thriving community of vibrant First Nations groups that are looking to get into genuine partnerships. And that's one way that you can help take advantage of Ceta opportunities. And this is particularly the case in my experience on the federal government side, where the federal government has a large number of procurements that do end up with set-asides for Indigenous enterprises. And that's relevant because a number of these projects, as we said, there's a lot of them that are BC run and operated and procured, but there's also the federal projects that run through British Columbia. And especially with some of the announcements and some of the changes with Alberta and looking to expand pipeline development, some of that might end up being something that the federal government wants to engage with and wants to engage with First Nations with, and that might be a very vibrant opportunity for EU specialists to start engaging in the Canadian space as part of these partnership opportunities.
Excellent. So we heard a little bit about BC Hydro's call for power or electricity. And the 2025 call was to acquire new, clean, and renewable electricity to meet increased demand. It all was sitting with deep partnerships with First Nations and independent power producers. Independent power producers are basically private companies or private organizations that generate electricity that then is exported to BC Hydro's grid. The scope was to acquire 5,000 gigawatt hours annually. And the timeline, it was launched in July 2025, building on call for power from 2024. Projects need to be clean and renewable. Now that call for power has been awarded. That's where the 10 projects that were mentioned by the previous speaker fall in. And they are in many ways just the beginning. We've also got the Major Projects Office, which is a brand new organization that was recently created by the federal government. And the Major Projects Office is this basically looking at projects of national significance. Now, there are a bunch of projects in BC that fall in the Major Projects Office. One is this LNG project, which is a very large project. We've also got this North Coast transmission line, as was mentioned. We've also got a new Yukon Territory BC grid connection for exporting electricity up to the Yukon from British Columbia. And we've also got a large critical minerals mine expansion. Now, each one of these projects has hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities for supply of services and technology solutions because they're very complicated. They involve lots of pieces and they cross lots of territories. In fact, every single one of these projects is also incorporating First Nations, if not many, many First Nations, especially transmission lines. Anything that crosses a long area is going to cross a lot of different territories. So this is just a snapshot of some of the major new, I'm saying new because many of these projects have been in development for many years, but they are basically being sped up. Now, one of the things I mentioned previously was the permitting process. It can be very slow in British Columbia and in Canada. The Major Projects Office, one of its remits is to try to address that specific element, to try and streamline and speed up the process of decision making. Now, there's a huge opportunity in BC because this is just some of the metrics around what the price point is going to be for wind. Now, BC is already currently paying the most money for wind. That's a price per megawatt hour at the bottom. So in BC, it's around 80 to roughly $95 Canadian per megawatt hour for electricity. They're expecting that to drop a little bit in 2030 and then go back up again by 2035. But that trend is very clear that BC is the place for the highest value electricity from wind in this regard. And that's one of the things to consider. The other thing is there's never been a better time for EU innovations to demonstrate the rapid decreases in cost and skills development and planning projects and bring that best practice to British Columbia. Having worked in the BC EU space for 11 years now, what's really interesting, having spent 20 years in Europe, walking around working in these projects from the European perspective, what I can say is we've never had, except in the last 6 months, a better opportunity than we do right now. Not only has the trade changes with the United States been a big factor in this, but it's actually helped Canada to waken up from our primary 72% trading partner, not necessarily being the one that's going to be reliable. It's forced Canada out of that comfort zone. And so there is a hunger that I've never seen now for EU innovations, which is really, really fun, especially working on a big EU project where I'm helping innovators come to Canada on a daily basis. So this is really an exciting time. So don't get dissuaded by the negatives and challenges that were mentioned. They're just mentioned so people can understand that this is a navigation process and there are things that need to be considered. As the previous speaker had mentioned, that there is more alignment between Bulgaria and Ireland than there is between BC and Alberta around many, many ways. There's a much more integrated process and planning and methodology in Europe than there is in Canada. But we're finally addressing some of that stuff for the first time in our country's history, which is actually really exciting. There's also huge renewable potential. Less than 1% of the wind opportunities in BC have been taken advantage of, and far less than 0.1% of solar. There's no wave and tidal power resources being utilized at all. BC is this vast, untapped opportunity for energy generation. Just gigantic. Now, We also have this very small load growth planning, 15% by 2030. And as mentioned, it's at odds with the broader electrification in BC and the rest of the world. So now the best way for BC to utilize its existing large-scale hydro assets is for them to be used for dispatchable electricity sales to the United States and to build more and more intermittent renewables, wind, solar, tidal, wave, geothermal, to meet more of the local demand growth. And this is finally starting to be understood as a potential. When you've got gigantic heritage dams, most of which from the 1950s and 60s, that are completely paid for, that can generate electricity incredibly cheaply, that is an incredible asset that can be used for dispatchability. And this is requiring some different thinking on behalf of how BC manages their electricity. But there's a huge opportunity. The other one is data centers. Current planning from the One Telecom company in BC is 400 megawatts of new data centers. This exceeds the total allocation for all data centers by 2030 by BC Hydro. So once again, the allocations are mismatched with the demand. That's a big opportunity to change that. We can instead make use of our cooler climate, especially in northern BC. 4 months, 5 months a year, data centers wouldn't require cooling that's managed cooling. They could be atmospheric cooling. We have a huge opportunity with the climate benefits there. We have very low land costs in those areas in northern regions, and new renewable generation could be built up there much more easily and quickly. So this creates an opportunity. The other thing is there's local sovereignty of data, which is a new issue that's starting to come. And this means that we could easily see BC becoming a data center hub of the world if we wanted to be. First Nations present this huge opportunity, both connect to the grid for export and for behind the fence generation opportunities, which can be much faster and simpler when it's a behind the fence solution than anything that connects to a grid. So some examples of success. Natural Forces, which is an Irish-Canadian company, has actually got a very big project that they're developing, a 15-megawatt wind energy project in Chetwynd in partnership with the Saulteaux First Nations. So this is a very good example of a project that is a European company that set up a Canadian operation who's working with the First Nation. They've also done a second one. So this is another wind project with another First Nation. So this is a great example of a European enterprise understanding this vast opportunity. And what else is coming is some upcoming projects for EU companies in BC. EDF from France has awarded a 30-year power purchase agreement for a 200-megawatt wind project with the Saulteaux First Nations. Again, that's going to be built and operating by 2031. And Econair from Spain has also got a 140-megawatt wind farm construction beginning in 2025. So we've got a lot of projects that are just beginning to get rolling. Thank you very much. Timing-wise, we're pretty well there. I question and answer, Kevin, how are we doing this? Are we waiting to the end or are we doing something now?
I think it'd be a good opportunity to kind of hear directly right at the moment, because I think that was really, really comprehensive and excellent. And I think why don't we stay relevant to what you folks are going on before shifting to the EU. So maybe we'll open it up for Q&A, as Megan's already done in the chat. Please use that function. I can either read them out or you can intervene directly. But why don't we start with Megan's first three questions here. What is the potential for BC LNG exports to the EU, and any relative price differential with U.S. origin LNG, given the distances to be covered? And two, what is the BC policy on data center development, given its hydro potential for providing sustainable energy sources to rising data demand? So I don't know if either of you want to take a crack at that. Maybe we can move to the third afterwards.
I could dive in, sure, unless, Robert, you want to. So BC, sure, thank you. BC LNG to Europe is not really realistic. The transport distances don't make sense. But that said, there is LNG exports that are being planned from the Maritimes on the east coast of Canada to Europe. There is a geographical issue, because for every 1,000 kilometers you transport LNG, you're adding a couple percent to its cost. And then there's a point where it just doesn't financially make sense any longer, right? And transporting from BC either through Panama through straight to Europe is just, that's 16,000 kilometers. It's just, that is not realistic from that.
It also, it also, a lot of the BC LNG and the Alberta LNG flowing through BC through Kitimat, and I believe Squamish is potentially going to be coming online in the next few years, is already destined for and kind of spoken for by East and Southeast Asia.
Yep.
And there's no way they're going to be taking the hit on selling for cheaper or lower margin compared to what they'd be getting selling into the East Asian market. And it's just a natural geography. I do have to echo what Jay said. There's some potentially very interesting things being done in the Maritimes, especially given the way that they do the offshore drilling and then refilling of the wells to potentially capture flow gas there and then use that in the processes and compressors there for LNG production. That's one of the more long-term plans that's been floated. It's definitely an interesting potential project, but that's something that's probably a little bit more long-term, and it's not going to be a BC LNG.
Yeah, exactly. And the data center development policy, as I mentioned, right now, the conservative approach to low load growth that BC Hydro persists needs to be addressed. Something needs to be changed in the way BC Hydro thinks and evaluates the potential. Now, BC Hydro has never had a load growth assessment that was correct. Its entire existence, every single time it's done a 4-year load growth assessment, it's missed the mark by as much as 40%. And those load growths are changing more radically now than ever. With electrification, with data centers, with AI, it's getting more and more demand, faster and faster. Everybody can see this. But we're still using the old ways of assessing how much demand there's going to be. So that has to be addressed. Because what's happened, and I've been a part of many policies, many projects where big users who want to build large data centers have been unable to do so because there's just not the ability to plug into the grid to get the electricity they need. That's the limiting factor. It's not the need. It's not the money. It's not the demand. It's entirely that the grid is not adaptable fast enough to meet that demand. The way the procurement process works within energy in BC is totally incompatible with what data centers do. Data centers make a decision in 1 year and build. They don't wait 4 years for permission to plug in. So that has to change.
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of that's being recognized at the federal level, at least, where the federal level has started to do things like the physical infrastructure standing offer program, and they're moving to an AI standing arrangement system, which is similar to like a vendor of record system, which will enable much faster procurement processes. Essentially, you'll be able to, on a rolling basis, qualify for a vendor list. And then once you're qualified, instead of going out with a huge RFP that covers everything, they can just go out to the specific invited vendors of record, either on a specific call-up basis, where that will be set in the documentation on like a rotational or number of units, or on a kind of what I call a skinny RFP, where it's essentially, we know what your offerings are because that's what we qualified you on. We need X number of units, please provide your price. And the price gets up, and then the vendor down selects the best option based upon what they're looking for. So that's something that we might end up seeing. I think one of the other sides of this as well, when we're talking about LNG, we're talking about data centers, we talked a lot about government procurement. I mean, that's because that's, I think, what's in both of our wheelhouses and what we've been selected for. But there's also the wide range in terms of, at the outset, we talked about Ceta and the ability to passport in on certain specific skills and certain credential recognition and service provision from overseas. And especially as we're getting into more AI-centric worlds and more AI-centric processing, it's worth noting that the Ceta market access commitments are on a negative list basis, not on a positive list basis, which means that it covers all services unless it's specifically carved out. So if you're thinking of being an AI company and wanting to provide AI services into the market, that's something you can much more readily do through the skills section, the services section of Ceta, even outside of the government context.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Great. Thank you, Robert, for that. That's a really interesting point. And Agnieszka asked the question, is there space for EU companies to sell technology for the LNG space? There is absolutely. These are multi-billion-dollar projects with thousands of suppliers. So, there is a vast potential there. But those are also going to be private procurement exercises. So it's about, engaging with the overriding bodies who are involved with the various different phases of those developments. So that's going back to the incumbents again. Who is it that's building the project? What are they looking for? What do they need? Because there are many LNG projects in development in BC already, pre-existing the Major Projects Office. So a lot of things going on. There's also a lot of new power lines that are not just the big West Coast one. There are additional power expansion. There is additional pipeline. There's maintenance. I mean, they're for the first time in BC is starting to look at electrifying the LNG sector and the gas sector all the way upstream from well extraction to distribution of that gas to processing. And those are all vast supply chains.
Yeah, just to echo that, it is a private market at the stage where you're supplying those entities. There's also the opportunity to provide parts, technology, and services to the government that's doing work in these sectors, not on the whole project basis, but often they'll look out for specifically maintenance services, specific parts, specific segments of the work that they'll go out and they'll bid, construction opportunities for road building and road maintenance to sites and to communities. These are all things that you can get involved with either through the government or through private procurement practices. It's just being attentive to it.
Sure, absolutely. The other one I would add is First Nations again. There's a significant amount of work that goes into the First Nations space for monitoring performance of projects by incumbents. So this could be emission monitoring or wastewater monitoring or transport monitoring. So there's a lot of opportunities for European technology companies that are in the monitoring space or the data analytics space to help and work directly with First Nations who have that as part of their supply agreement. If you build a mine on a First Nations land, there will be a financial process set up to pay the First Nation to monitor the mine and its performance, because you need that third party process. So there are opportunities there too. And what I would say is a lot of European companies are quite advanced in the monitoring space because the regulatory frameworks in Europe have been more complex for a lot longer. You've had to monitor in Europe much more for longer. So therefore, there could be first mover advantage in that space.
Excellent context. Thank you both for that. I don't see anything else in the chat, but I will maybe give it one more minute or another call if there are folks who'd like to raise any questions for these two before we shift to our second segment. Well, I don't see any, but of course, please do feel free to follow up directly with us after the fact. And in the meantime, we will move ahead. So thank you, Jay. Thank you, Robert. Very, very helpful and excellent perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
So turning to similar themes, I mean, alternatively though, from a perspective from the EU, we are certainly fortunate to welcome today doctors Maria Katari and Christian Kokiu. So I apologize on the pronunciation there if I got it right, but correct me if I didn't, and if or give it to yourselves either way. But Maria, I'll just provide these two introductions before shifting over to them and their expertise. But we're very grateful to have you both here. Maria is an energy transition and sustainability expert focused on shaping a climate resilient, people-centered future. She has deep expertise across the European Union and international governance on energy and climate policy, innovation, socioeconomic transformation. She brings both strategic insight and hands-on experience to complex global challenges. She is the founder of the Energy Matrix Research and Policy Consultancy, advising public institutions, international organizations, non-governmental organizations, and social enterprises, including the European Commission and the UN, on policies that drive sustainable and inclusive change. So welcome, Dr. Katari. Dr. Kokiu Christian is a partner at Lutz Abel law firm and a public procurement and market entry expert who helps international organizations navigate the complexities of the European Union and German tendering. He has a PhD in law and extensive experience advising public authorities as well as national and global companies. He combines legal precision with strategic insight into how international actors can succeed in European procurement markets. He has supported clients across Germany, Europe, and worldwide in designing, preparing, and implementing procurement strategies across all phases of the cycle, from early positioning to bid preparation and representation in review procedures. So I will begin with you, Dr. Qatari. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well? Yes. Okay, great. So then I will pull up my slides. Would like you to confirm that you are able to see my screen once this comes.
We can.
Okay, thank you. Very glad to be here and sharing my knowledge and insights on this very fascinating topic. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks very much for the previous speakers setting up very nicely the scene and already bringing up some questions about the EU side. So from my side and Christian, we're going to bring the EU perspective, exploring Ceta and how Ceta actually and EU are accelerating green transition and how those two open some concrete pathways for the British Columbia companies. Already said, and Jay already said that it's there's no better moment actually for this type of collaboration between British Columbia and Europe, because indeed the European Union is scaling clean energy is faster than any other moment in its economic history, and it's very deliberately looking to trusted partners like Canada in order to help to secure that shift. I really liked an introductory comment made that BC is an energy powerhouse. That's not really the case for the European Union. European Union energy policy has always been shifted around the fact that the European Union, its member states, are dependent mainly to external sources of energy, meaning, oil and gas. Previously, we all know, all these discussions about Russia, and very recently the announcement of the phase out of the Russian gas dependency. So this is why actually, the European Union, its member states, are looking into clean technology and renewable energy. So the focus here would be where actually the British Columbia SMEs can really plug in this opportunity to compete and also, have some win-win cases in this evolving landscape. So our presentation will be divided in two parts. So myself, I will deep dive into the EU clean tech and energy scene and how this unlocks market opportunities. So going a little bit in the bigger picture on what is happening in the EU and the clean tech sector right now. What are the financial tools that they are available? The big discussion around the clean industrial deal and how this also unlocks opportunities, and also how we could chart the future. So what are the trends are coming and how actually the SMEs could make informed investment decisions based on available tools on the EU side. And then I would like to focus in two particular sectors that they are prominent for collaboration between the British Columbia and the European Union member states. These are hydrogen and clean fuels, and then the critical raw materials, while recapping on how Ceta can leverage Ceta and other actually cooperation opportunities frameworks can leverage opportunities for SMEs. Before giving the floor to Christian to deep dive into the procurement and how the public procurement in the EU is really the door opening to the clean tech and EU energy market. So let's start. So EU decarbonization agenda is no longer just a climate policy. It really becomes an industrial and economic strategy that is designed to build competitive advantages. So here, what that means for the British Columbia companies. There are three main things. EU, it really offers a rapidly expanding market. So the global clean tech is on track to triple to 2 trillion by 2035. And Europe really wants to anchor as much of that in the value chain domestically as possible. There are also very growing market gaps. We have the delays and cancellations on the US side that really creating reliable and cost competitive suppliers. Those can be Canadian partners. A trusted partnership. EU-Canada cooperation has Ceta that gives British Columbia companies low-risk, stable access to a market that really wants and needs clean electricity, clean technologies, and also transparent supply chains. A main key takeaway, it is really an unusually even aligned moment for this transatlantic cooperation between the two parties. So nowadays, really, the EU has shifted from really thinking, on the high level of funding innovation. We all, might have known the big funding project, the big funding framework, the Horizon Europe program, to really how to fund deployment and how to bring this deployment at scale. And this, for the British Columbia SMEs, could really translate into easier access to capital and, of course, more bankable business cases. Let's highlight some worth notes. EU is really introducing a simplified state aid regimes under the Clean Industrial Deal, that this will let the EU governments, the EU member state governments, to subsidize clean tech manufacturing and industrial decarbonization even more aggressively. Then another part, very important, is the Innovation Fund. Is a funding mechanism that will unlock 40 billion through the horizon of 2030 for commercial scale clean industry projects, mainly, of course, in the hydrogen also space. Then we have the European Investment Bank expansion that will offer more lending, so more money will be available for industrial decarbonization and energy transition assets. There is also the EU-Canada Green Investment Platform, and there is a proposal of 15 to 20 billion transatlantic financing vehicle that would be pooled by European and Canadian funds. So these mechanisms all can significantly de-risk market entry to the European Union for Canadian / British Columbian firms. There is a lot of discussion lately within the European Union on the Clean Industrial Deal. There's some skepticism that the European Green Deal is now on a backlash. And however, I am on the positive side. And actually, the European Green Deal has really set up a framework and foundation. And it was actually the national determined contributions on behalf of the European Union, but it went beyond an energy and climate framework. The European Green Deal really wanted to set the foundations in transforming the economic system of the European Union. Hence, here it comes the clean industrial deal that is very, very much needed, of course, to reinforce the competitiveness of the European industry and other sectors. So it's actually, we can name it as a production side engine for the green transition. And there are three core opportunities that stand out and I would like to bring to your attention. There would be a large-scale market demand. There's already a 100 billion industrial decarbonization bank that will be available to accelerate deployment and help to close any financial gap in the energy and clean tech sector. There's also laying the foundation for predictable project environments, faster permitting, longer-term renewable contracts and reduce energy costs, which will make the European Union more stable destination for clean energy investments. Then there is also this pool for low carbon material and products. So the carbon intensity labeling and new procurement rules that, of course, will be in place from the new year after. We really hope that they will reward these early movers in clean manufacturing and circular value chains. What that means for the British Columbia SMEs, that means that earlier revenue opportunities, also a clear path to scale up. I would like to also to bring to your attention some publicly available tools that can materially improve this market targeting from on behalf of the SMEs. So the Bruegel Clean Tech Tracker that actually gets data from Eurostat, the official EU statistic agency, shows where Europe is leading, where Europe is lagging, and where Europe is investing across the full clean tech spectrum. And another available tool is the Clean Energy Technology Observatory. I could also praise, because this was actually the former team that I used to collaborate with when I used to work for the European Commission's Joint Research Center, that is also, the so-called EU Science Hub, that tracks competitiveness, research output, and also the deployment needs across the EU technologies. And here for the SMEs, I really believe that these tools, if can be, monitored, answer the very critical question. Where does the European Union and actually its member states have these supply gaps that Canadian firms can fill? So here I took some screenshots from these trackers. And here we really can see that the tracker, the Bruegel Clean Tech Tracker, and I can actually share the link to the tracker in the chat later on. It really has the ability to identify investment hotspots. It's very valuable because it really provides this forward-looking signal. Where would be the manufacturing expansions? Where are the technology diffusion? And where actually the policy is driving the market pool? You can the SMEs can use it in order to target markets with strong readiness and lower competitive pressure. And you can already see that you can actually play with the tool, and you can really see what are also import-export relations with Canada. Here actually there is a screenshot that showcases the battery trade between Canada and the EU that has strengthened significantly, and we see that Canada is emerging as a preferred source for low carbon critical minerals, and also that Europe is diversifying away from single country dependencies. So this for the companies would mean that there will be more demand for materials, components, and also technology partnerships across the battery supply chains. And this actually I will go into more details when I will discuss more on the critical raw material side. Well, Europe is a sum of its parts, so it's also good to look into the member states also individually. So here is a screenshot that shows, of course, that the EU member states, a lot of them, they're scaling battery cell capacity quickly. That this creates, of course, procurement demand for materials, again, equipment, and British Columbia companies with strengths in this type of services can have actually, can look for expansions with direct partnerships and suppliers opportunities in specific member states. And this tracker really help to do that. A little bit on a more, I would say, scientific, even more theoretical side, the Clean Energy Technological Observatory provides these granular assessments of competitiveness and supply chain gaps in the European Union. I still believe it's very useful for firms because they could identify where the European Union needs external partners. And these reports mention explicitly external partners, and Canada is mentioned across them. And I really would highly recommend it as a tool that could really help the British Columbia SMEs to position themselves inside these emerging European industrial ecosystems. As I already announced, I would like to do a deep dive on the hydrogen sector. I firmly believe that the Europe's hydrogen strategy creates a significant opportunity for the British Columbia. So already there is an announcement of the EU-Canada corridor that aims to be fully operational by 2035. And we have seen already a new demand for hydrogen imports that would be would increase sharply after 2030. The combination of British Columbia clean electricity, natural gas reserves has already been presented by the previous speakers, could of course position SMEs as competitive suppliers, but also the fuel cell market in Europe is also scaling, and this is also supported by strict vehicle standards and alternative future regulations. Here also it's very worth mentioning that there is the so-called H2 Global created by Foundation and Hintco. It's actually the world's only clean market maker. I can also share the link to that speeds up transition to clean commodities by building these liquid markets for low carbon products. And this foundation actually is a joint partnership. So you have, it drives global networks, engages key decision makers and partners with institutions and companies, and is using data-driven analysis to advance this funding mechanism and other market tools worldwide. And already Canada has committed with 3 Canadian million, that's approximately 200 million euros to bolster clean hydrogen trade between Canada and Germany already. And this initiative is part of the joint Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance that really aims to facilitate industrial decarbonization in Germany and across Europe. I have also put here an example of existing collaborator that relates to electric buses. Is about a Canadian company that also has, of course, offices in the EU. But we see already, how this collaboration is shaping. Going to the critical raw material, Canada is recognized by the EU's Critical Material Act as a strategic and reliable source of essential energy transition materials. So imports also of Canadian lithium, graphite and other minerals have grown significantly since Ceta. That's of course important to mention that this mainly relates to Ontario and Quebec provinces, but there is also opportunities ahead to include joint investments in mining and processing and recycling, and also these closed loop systems. There is also regulatory alignment that is offered under the G7 roadmap that is actually headed by Canada that strengthens this partnership. But I would also like to offer a concrete example from the British Columbia that refers to the Upper Feed deposit that is contributing to the EU funding project under Horizon Europe. It's actually a big consortium, also Spanish companies, but really this company from British Columbia is playing a big role because it's actually going to export this part of critical minerals to the EU, and already illustrates Europe's appetite for this structured Canadian partnership, and also the credibility even of British Columbia as a resource base in this area. So just a recap slide in order, also to offer the mic to my colleague Christian to delve into more on the procurement side. I would like just to repeat that Ceta really provides a foundation. Tariff elimination, smoother investment flows, access to public procurement. However, it's also worth mentioning that there are also other additional frameworks that build and shape the cooperation of the EU and Canada in the energy and clean tech sector. These being the Green Alliance, also the High-Level Energy Dialogue, also collaboration in mission innovation. So all these can lock in long-term cooperations. So, and together they can really create a stable, predictable environment for cross-border energy and clean tech projects. Also mentioning again the Clean Industrial Deal. The Clean Industrial Deal really proposes and endorses the creation of clean trade investment partnership, and EU has already concluded one with South Africa. And again, I will leave in the chat a very important and very interesting article that has been really fresh to the press, where again Canada is mentioned as a preferred a partner to create this clean trade and investment partnership. So Christian, over to you. I will move the slide, so please let me know when you need your next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. We can say that if we talk today about the Clean Industrial Deal, hydrogen or critical raw materials or clean technologies, we are not only talking about regulations, but also, and very importantly, about investment. And the European Union's central investment instrument is the public procurement. And public procurement includes all purchases made by the public sector. And the public sector in the European Union are all the ministries, the federal states, the regions, the public companies, the public law institutions, like universities, hospitals, and so on. And according to a recent estimate, public procurement in the European Union accounts for around 14% of the EU's gross domestic product. And in absolutely terms, this is a total annual volume of approximately 2 trillion euro. That's quite a huge amount. And anyway, the public procurement is precisely where the Clean Industrial Deal comes in. It uses public procurement as a mark lever to scale up clean technology, more quickly build industrial capacity, and secure supply chain. And for companies from BC, this is not only a theoretical debate, but a very, very concrete question. How do I get these contracts? And I'm even allowed to. The next slide, please. And the other also. One more, please. But before we answer this question, we need to understand. No, one back, please. Yeah, we need to understand the public procurement system in the European Union. European public procurement law is based essentially on three key directives. We have the Directive 2014-24, and which regulates the traditional public procurement. Then we have the Directive 2014-25, which regulates the procurement by sectoral contracting authorities, particularly in the areas of energy, water, and transport. And we also have the Directive 2014-23, that's the concession award. So it's also interesting for the energy sector. And these directives apply throughout the European Union and are transposed into national law by all member states. And this is a very big advantage from companies situated outside the European Union, because the procurement law system in the European Union is comparable in all EU countries. So anyone who understands a procurement procedure in Germany or the Netherlands or France will recognize the basic pattern everywhere. And once a company has successfully participated in a public procurement procedure in one EU member state, it can start for expansion into all the other European countries. Next slide, please. So a public procurement procedure is required if all of the following conditions are made. First, we need a public contracting authority. Public contracting authorities are, for example, the central government authorities, like, for example, the Bundesrepublik Deutschland. Or it's a sub-central authorities, like, for example, the city of Munich or the city of Frankfurt or another city in Germany. We have also sectoral contracting authorities, which can be public contracting authorities, like the big companies in Germany, like E.ON, RWE, and Vattenfall. The second requirement is that we need a public contract or a concession. The third requirement is that the value of the public contract or the concession has to reach the EU thresholds. I will come back to this. And the fourth requirement is that there must be no exceptions of the scope of the application. For example, there's an implementing decision of the European Commission establishes certain activities in the field of production and wholesale of electricity from renewable energy sources in Germany, which are subject to full competition. In this case, this directive 2014-25 is not applicable. And the aim of all this is to reach competition, transparency, equal treatment, and access to the market. Next slide, please. And here you can see the public procurement thresholds. You can see we have quite high thresholds for construction contracts, over 5 million euro. And we have a lower thresholds for most types of services and supply contracts. If there's a central government authority, the threshold is 143,000 euros. It's quite low. And if it's a sub-central contracting authority, it's 221,000. And these are the current values. But please note that the thresholds are adjusted every 2 years. And the next time will be the 1st January 2026. And for lower value tenders, only the national public procurement rules apply. And these are very, very different to the EU public procurement rules and are very special, but we will focus today on the EU public procurement. So next slide, please. And the question now is, can companies from BC gain access to the clean tech and energy market through public procurement? Until 2024, access was relatively easy. According to previous case law, especially the German case law on public procurement law, any company, whether located in the European Union or outside the European Union, could participate in public procurement procedures in the European Union. However, the European Court of Justice ruled in the very important and famous Collin case that market access for third country companies no longer automatically results from the EU public procurement law, but rather from trade agreements. And for Canada, this is Ceta. So every contract must be now assessed to determine whether it is covered by Ceta or not. So the question rises, when does Ceta apply to procurement? We have 4 questions. The first is, who is tendering? Is the contract authority listed in the Ceta annexes? If yes, we go to the second question, and that is, what is being procured? Is it goods, services, or combinations for public purposes? The third question is, does the contract value of the relevant thresholds under Ceta reach the relevant thresholds under Ceta? And this is not very difficult anymore because the thresholds in Ceta are the same thresholds you saw the slide before. So it's always the same amount. And the fourth question is there a specific exceptions from the scope of Ceta? And this distinction is quite complex and must be examined on a case-by-case basis, especially for energy and grid projects. Maybe we go to the next slide, please. There you can see what's so difficult, because many energy services are generally covered by Ceta, but we have quite a lot of exceptions. For example, in Annex 19.7, there is, it calls that chapter shall not apply to contracts awarded by procuring entities covered under Annex 19.1 and 19.2 in connection with activities in the fields of energy, unless covered under Annex 19.3. And we have another exception in 19.3, number 2, and it is that this chapter shall not apply to contracts awarded by procuring entities covered under this annex for the supply of energy or of fuels for the production of energy. So in every case, we have to raise the question, is there an exception under Ceta, especially relevant for the energy sector? Next slide, please. But if this special procurement you're interested is covered by Ceta, all procurement regulation apply. And companies from British Columbia then have effectively the same rights as EU companies. Especially can companies from BC, in this case, rely on the basic principles of public procurement law. You can see these principles. They are very, very important in European procurement law. And I want to focus on one, and this is the equal treatment principle. Maybe you can switch to the next slide, please. And this principle specifies that there is no preference for local tenderers. And therefore, companies from British Columbia must be treated in the same way and have the same rights as every European company or local company from Europe. And this principle of equal treatment also guaranteed that the contract must be awarded on objective award criteria, what is also very important for equal treatment. And there's one more advantage of this principle, because the tenders must generally be awarded on a product-neutral basis. This means that the tender specification shall generally not refer to a specific production or origin or particular process, if this would favor or exclude certain undertakings or certain products. Maybe we can switch to the next. Yeah. And the question is where you find all these tenders. And you can find them in TED. There is only one EU platform for all tenders in the European Union. And this is TED. It calls Tenders Electronic Daily. And it's very easy to find these tenders there. You can just search for them, and you can also get a newsletter if you register. And so you always know what is happening in the whole European Union. Next, please. Yeah, I think this is yours. Yeah.
Thanks, Christian. So here I would like actually, to bring your attention another very, very interesting tool where particularly SMEs could go and find information on which actually EU fund and funding mechanism is better for them. And I found it's very interactive. It's actually through the Clean Tech for Europe website, and again we're going to share the link to that in the chat later. And it's called the Clean Tech for Europe Explainer. That's the tool. So there, actually, so this is actually, this is a screenshot of an exercise that I did for the sake of the webinar. So you can type the type of the applicant. So here I said, okay, I am either a startup or a spin-off of the SME. And then it asks you, the next question is the location of the applicant. So you have either if you are a startup, spin-off or SME within the EU or the rest of the world. So choosing the rest of the world, then you have the opportunity to choose what is your section of innovation, because mainly clean tech, it looks into the mainly innovation projects. And then I have chosen energy and power, and then it is actually asks what is the technology readiness level of a specific application or or tool or technology that the startup spin-off and SMEs is offering. So I have just chosen the higher TRL 9. It's like a product that is really ready to in the market. And what you get actually is all the available funding mechanisms within the European Union. And what is I found very, very interesting is that it gives you the focus. So here you see that it's like mainly climate focus, and it also gives you information about the application style. So it's going to be a grant funding, so for example, or equity finance. So then the SME can really choose if that actually it's something that would like to go further with on. But I also really like that it gives you the percentage of success rate. So instead of going, because of course preparing all these tenders and applications can really cost time/money to an SME. So it's nice that you have already an indication what would be the success rate in participating in this type of tendering. I give the mic back to Christian for the next slide.
Yeah, and just a few words to the most common pitfalls in procurement procedures in my praxis. So first of all is that a lot of companies overlook tenders in TED, and as I already said, a very useful tool is the newsletter. Every company can sign up for specific services they are interested in, and they get the newsletter weekly about new announcement of tenders. The second common pitfall is that many companies, even in Germany, who take part in a tender in Germany, they fail in procurement procedures because they miss deadlines. And this includes in particular the tender deadline. The problem is in our law that if the tender is not submitted in time, the bid must be excluded from the tender process. So it's quite a hard result, but that's the law. And another common pitfall is the misunderstanding of tender specifications, contract notice, and tender documents. We have seen many cases in our praxis where especially foreign countries have misunderstood the tender documents, partly because of the complexity of the documents and partly because of the lack of language skills. So misunderstanding these documents can have serious consequences as the exclusion from the tenderer. Another common pitfall is the deviation from tender documents leading to exclusion from the procurement procedure. And the risk of exclusion from the award procedure due to a tender that deviates from the specific of the tender documents is quite high. And according to our law system, a tender must always be excluded if the bidder does not offer the contract what the contract authority has specified in the tender documents. So also this is the result. And and there's also a common pitfall is a lack of knowledge about timing and possibilities of judicial protection. Of course, we have a judicial protection system, but it's very specific. It's not the normal civil procedure, but it's a very specific law system in all different EU member states. And the last common pitfalls to mention is the lack of awareness that the public authority specification alone are relevant and tenders usually cannot offer alternatives. Some words here for the common pitfalls, and I think the next tender is your floor, Maria.
Yes, just to summarize a bit, you can see my slide. I mean, we have said that there are, like, of course, opportunities, a great momentum. However, the British Columbia SMEs, they really must navigate into a very, advanced, complex regulatory environment in the EU that has been, specifically made in order for the EU to reach also, the climate and the decarbonization goals, but also really build this market also within the EU and based on principle of just and fairness and transparency. So it's really actually, of course, it's a great momentum, but companies need to be realistic. And operating in Europe, it really requires to navigate into a very sophisticated, even regulatory environment. So some key areas, there are many divergent, let's say, sustainability rules. So there is already, about the use of biomass. That is already actually there was a concern of Canadian side because Canada is exporting biomass to EU. Also, the EU taxonomy regulation, what falls actually and what is labeled as a technology or an intervention that really would enable the EU climate and energy goals, and also the whole life cycle emissions regulation. And then we also have very tight, very sector specific regulations. A telling example is this fuel quality directive, and of course worth mentioning the methane standards. That, of course, they're converging between EU and Canada towards net zero expectations by 2027. And, last but not least, the carbon border adjustment mechanism that will be in place from next year on. And we really need to see the details of how will affect cost competitiveness of carbon-intensive imports. But again, on the positive side, and coming back again to the presentation of Jen Roger, all this possibility of renewable energy, and then how products that they are covered under the CBAM, like clean iron produced by clean electricity, this can be exempted. So there's already opportunities that could be saved around that. So I really believe that it is manageable despite all this regulatory framework to say, but it really requires from the private sector, from the SMEs, to be early complying, to plan early for compliance. Also, we see that European Union is tightening trade controls in strategic industries. And what that means, that there might be higher scrutiny in the foreign direct investment, especially for batteries, EVs, and other clean tech sectors. And there is also kind of this, part also of the ongoing discussion right now in the European Union about this favoring the EU-based suppliers under these Made in Europe reforms. I don't think personally that it's realistic to say that Europe can do everything by itself. So I would mainly, direct you to think about making with Europe, and this is actually, where Canadian freedoms and British Columbia freedoms can come into place. So a key message could be that partnerships, local presence, and also joint ventures that exist in the EU can really be strong ways to navigate these challenging dynamics. And just to conclude, two other strategic risks that is worth monitoring. Is, of course, the US Inflation Reduction Act, and how both Canada and the EU are countering with, co-financing tools and these long-term contracts so that they could keep the investments flows balanced. And of course, a big question is about this price, renewable price volatility that could affect the economics for power purchase agreements. The one, for example, mentioned with EDF, and the contracts for difference. These actually, mainly related to the hard to abate sectors that really. It's really central to secure long-term and off-take agreements. And I really believe that also, being aware of these dynamics will really help to set more resilient investment strategies on behalf of the British Columbia firms. So that's from our side. We really thank you, and we are ready to discuss with you and address any questions. So we'll stop sharing my screen now that I am able to.
It was excellent. Thank you. That was excellent. And, there's a lot of parallels, it seems, between both jurisdictions, of course, in terms of complexity. Maybe just building off of what Megan's posted in the chat, and was just curious, in your experience, do you have any visibility on utilization rates of those other jurisdictions who, at subnational or national level, who have equal market access with the EU, of some taking better advantage in the energy sector than others? And maybe if you have any insights as to why. Megan points out the transportation challenge. Of course, there's the Atlantic separating the two of us, but I'm sure that's not the only limitation. And Christian mentioned some of the other common pitfalls and how they can be overcome. But I'm not sure if either of you have any perspective in terms of those jurisdictions that are taking better advantage.
You mean in the EU on
inbound in the EU? Yeah.
I mean, who is the most, let's say, so far reliable partner? Or, I mean, there's no favoritism. That's the only sure thing. And I mean, this far we have to be realistic, you have, although, the problems, a lot of problems have been, you had the Russia that used to be a main trade partner in the fossil fuel sector. Apart from that, there are of course very good collaborations within the European Economic Area. So of course you have the previously EU member state. We're talking about the UK, but then there are also quite good collaboration with Norway, but also North Africa. So we're talking about also North Africa countries, and then of course you have some smaller but still strategic partnerships in the South Caucasus area. So all this is kind of the parameter of the European Union, and I think that this has already been mentioned, these dimensions of geography. So the transportation is always could be a key barrier. Of course, it depends on the type of the fuel that is transported, and I see that indeed, Megan, for the critical raw materials, transportation is less of a constraint. But I have to say that there are many different critical raw materials, and it depends on which one we're talking about and which application, of course, that might this actually diversify a lot. I mean, the critical raw materials we have seen China going a little bit too aggressive, let's say, and this kind of scared the European Union. So hence, and I will actually, European Commission just this week, it has adopted the so-called Resource EU. So it's a strategy to secure raw material, and this is also, the endorsement of the G7 that Canada is leading. So trying to diversify again the suppliers.
I can also only add something from my practice. Okay, it's far away at the coast in British Columbia, but there are some clients of mine who are situated, they are cities, they are situated on the coast of Germany, on the northern coast and the east coast, and they all buy LNG, and they all build these LNG terminals, and they get the LNG from everywhere in the world, and that would be also a great possibility. Yeah.
Very interesting.
And they
Thank you for that.
still searching for partners. They are very happy to get more partners. Yeah.
Maybe it's not as far as we think then. I'll open it up to the floor here in addition to what any of Megan's contributions here as well. Anything else that folks want to raise or ask of these two?
Okay, I see, Kevin, another question from Megan. If some EU member states are more positive about hydrogen than others, I mean that's a good question. However, I would even diversify a little bit the question about if there are EU member states that are more ready to have hydrogen both production and consumption than others, and that's true for the northern Western European member states. So there's already collaboration between Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. So there is actually already a corridor, but you have also some smaller EU member states. This including actually my country of origin, Greece, that they have quite some good investments in hydrogen. And since you mentioned that, you see there that the Innovation Fund has really enabled that. Of course, there's big questions of hydrogen about the storage and making and transforming the previously gas corridors to hydrogen-ready corridors. And this is a bigger question that relates to construction, but maybe this is also, something that Canadian firms could look like, because of course we can talk about alternative fuels and clean, but it's also a matter of be ready to the grid. But okay, I see that, you'd say, Mega, that it was a statement. So I agree that some EU member states are even more positive but also ready. So the ones that they are more positive, I think that they're more ready.
I'm sure you can see Agnieszka's question here about shedding some light on the mobility of services in the energy sector between EU and Canada.
What do you exactly mean with mobility of services? G? Labor. I mean, how this would affect local jobs, correct? I mean, this is how I understand the question.
Yes.
I mean, great.
Sorry,
yeah, great.
I can actually probably ask it. I would like to know how easy or difficult it is when you want to export your technology, for example, in the energy sector to the EU, how difficult or easy it is to follow up, with specialized technicians or anyone who would like to sort of set up the technology.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, it depends on the sector, actually. So I can bring some insights from, the energy efficiency and especially the energy efficiency in buildings. So there, especially many EU member states, one of those is the Netherlands, also the France, have certified trainers that could help you, go through how to do the investment and how actually, which are the most relevant applications that you can do at a building, but they also offer trainings to specialists. To be honest, I haven't heard that this can be also, open to other nationalities, but it's a very, very fair question. But what also, Horizon Europe advocates is that this collaboration actually is also, bridging this gap. Let's say that if there is a company or, for example, a research center or the company that I brought as an example, that if they collaborate with the EU counterparts, they get to know how EU works. So this is kind of an added value, I would say. But I would also, bring to your attention that there's also, this discussion about firms that they would be, investing in the EU, that we also, this question about if there's going to be a loss of works for EU workers. So this is also, something that can be a challenge. But I saw that Jay would like to intervene here. Jay, please.
Thank you. So when it comes to labor mobility, that's a challenge. Canada has huge labor mobility challenges inside of itself. Something that is quite surprising to Europeans is that an engineer in Alberta sometimes can't work in BC. A nurse in Ontario has trouble working in Manitoba. So we do have a challenge around those areas. So European engineers, for instance, when they typically come to Canada, have a long haul to get recognized and locally certified so they can work. So what happens in that regard is you go through the proxy. You get a local certified engineer to work with you on the teams to sign everything off until the process is developed enough that you can go through the hoops to get yourself certified. So it's always a bridge. But it raised the issue because it's surprising to most Europeans that that's the case. It can take years for an electrical engineer from Germany to be able to work in British Columbia. Typically many years. There's no reason for it. It's just protectionism. It's tribalism. And the tribalism that exists in Canada is provincial. Provinces protect each other from other provinces, it's something that is at the very beginning of being addressed again, just like the internal trade barriers. So just want to raise that issue so people can understand. You need a local. They've got to be the one who sign off on everything, at least for a while.
One addition, because Ceta contains an own chapter about the temporary entry and stay of national persons for business purposes. And of course, it doesn't create a free movement of labor, but at least a temporary mobility. And so I think it must be examined on a case-by-case basis if in this special case, and to which extent there is a movement of labor. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add something there, you see actually, why he also, is setting up all these standards about the labeling. So there you have kind of uniform, let's say, let's take the energy labels for the electric appliances. So you had so many different, labels in the different EU member states even. So, Jay, you're talking about provinces. Imagine about 27 before 28 and a very powerful EU member state, talking about the UK. Now we have these streamlining of how you define certain things in the energy sector, and I think it's very, very helpful because also this helps the construction also in manufacturing that needs to comply to certain standards. And for me, this is maybe it's not direct, but it's even an indirect positive impact to the labor market as well. So, but it takes time, of course. But I think already, some very good steps are setting there, and then you see also, new and emerging technologies already they have this element of standardization already because you see that is quite needed and affects also labor mobility.
A good example of that is the phone connectors. The European Union forced Apple to use a standardized phone connector cable, and it offered Apple for 10 years the ability for the center to be the Apple connector, and Apple refused. And it was forced by law to accept the USB-C. That was EU, and now Canada benefits from that because our phones now do that too. So Europe has been a leader on standards forever, and it's a very good example of exactly that, because we all know you don't need 17 different cables to plug your phones in. It's just because manufacturers have taken that route as they've developed products. Canada has a vast opportunity, and I've been working in this space for 11 years of trying to convince Canadians to copy European methodologies so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We as Canadians struggle immensely with this. We keep trying to reinvent the wheel. And so at least I'll say this, our Prime Minister right now is the first one in Canadian history who's ever even addressed this issue at all. Now, the reason for this is Canada was a federation of separate regions, provinces that were not a country, who joined together and each had their own negotiation as to how they join the Dominion of Canada. And so some provinces carved out strange little sovereignty pieces which are really confusing when you look at it now. You can't bring more than 12 bottles of beer from New Brunswick into Nova Scotia. It just weird stuff like that. And a lot of that's still there because no one's looked at it, because no one's needed to look at it. But our prime minister now is actually talking about this and saying we got to stop some of these internal barriers. We've got to create an endemic industry that helps us make up for what's happening with our trade issues with the US. In fact, just breaking down internal Canadian trade barriers would raise more money than what we're losing from the trade war with the US. Just that alone would do that. So when you do that, you also ironically get yourself ready for Europe. So this is the exciting piece of this.
So just as one final note from me, and apologies for not being on camera, but I'm a bit under the weather today. When it comes to this, there's an additional wrinkle, which is the Americans, and that particularly is on the regulatory sphere, because there's a number of areas, especially highly integrated areas like autos, where Canadian regulations are very much meant to be in lockstep with US regulations, so that you don't have to, stop your car at the border when you're changing countries and now all of a sudden reassess whether or not it's road legal in the other jurisdiction. So that's the one pressure playing against it. In terms of Ceta and what people can do, the one other area I would highly encourage stakeholders to do is engage their local governments around the regulatory roundtable process. There is Jay had mentioned that there is the ability to get your products screened and approved under Canadian standards in the EU and under EU standards in Canada. And that is a component of Ceta. But the regulatory harmonization is much more aspirational, and it's going to be a slog and item specific. And it might be true harmonization, it might be sufficiency recognition, but this is something that can only happen if industry engages with government and makes clear that this is a priority to break down those barriers. And that's going to be a very important step.
This is excellent contribution. I am mindful of time, especially for those who are based in Europe. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I think it's a good tone to leave it on, that you can shift to government, because we want to provide a lot of our resources, I think, and hear from businesses, of course, in both jurisdictions. So to the point that Janelle was making, there are some resources there. I know there's others that have circulated in the chat as well. I think we'll make sure to ensure that all those services that are offered by the government of BC and elsewhere are available to folks, as well as the recording. But before we close it out, I obviously want to thank the presenters, but I want to shift it over back to Ruben Kubiak again to provide some closing remarks, because this has been a very fruitful discussion. So I appreciate it from everybody. But over to you, Ruben.
Thank you very much. And indeed it has. And thanks, Kevin. Thanks to all the experts and presenters. I want to keep it very brief. We're already over time. So I really want to just thank all the participants for these great questions. I mean, also the very lively conversation in the chat. The experts for really showing what opportunities there could be in better connecting British Columbia and the European Union. Also what challenges there are. I think we need to be also very open about that. I hope that was very helpful for especially our joiners from the business community, giving new ideas, new impetus, how they can help us strengthen trade and investment relations between British Columbia and the European Union, especially in the energy sector, but maybe also beyond. And that brings me to my last point. I want to again remind that this is really just the first webinar, what we want to have in a series between the European Union and British Columbia, also focus on other sectors throughout the next year. To really leverage everything that we can from Ceta, as just been said before. We are living now in challenging times. European businesses, Canadian businesses are looking more and more to opportunities away from maybe traditional trading partners. And we do believe there is a lot of potential in bridging and connecting British Columbia and the European Union with innovative solutions, with technologies, with people, with knowledge, with expertise. So on that, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have had this webinar. And from my side, I wish you all a very good evening or rest of the day, afternoon.
Thank you.